So the first question, as I said, is a bank reconciliation. The following information was taken from the books of RCB traders on the 30th of June 2009. So as you can see, this question was taken from quite an old exam paper, but remember, Bank Recon as a section has not really changed, so it doesn't matter which papers you are practicing from. Right, then we're given our information, which I'm not going to look at in too much of detail. So as I can see, there's quite a bit of information that is given to me. Right, let's now go to the actual questions and let's see what we are completing. So we're going to calculate the bank balance as per the general ledger, and this is for 7 marks. So immediately, guys, calculate the bank balance. So remember, you can do a sum or you can choose to draw the actual bank account. Now that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw up the bank account. So that's the first part to the question. Then the second part, I think I skipped something. Let me just go further down. They want us also to prepare the bank reconciliation statement as at 30th of June 2009. So as you can see, right, this is for 6 marks. And then there's a bit of theory questions on the actual information itself. So remember, guys, an exam technique, always look at what is required before you begin with the actual question. Right, so what I'm going to do is, as I'm going to read through the information, I am going to complete 1.1.1, the bank account balance, and I'm also going to do the bank reconciliation statement at the same time. Now, before we begin with this question, right, let's just quickly recap on Bank Recon. Okay, so remember, what is a reconciliation? A reconciliation is simply a comparison between 2 sets of documents. So when I have to ask you what is a bank reconciliation, we are comparing, okay, we are comparing the bank statement that is obviously received from the bank to our records. In other words, our CRJ, our CPJ, and our general ledger bank account. So remember, we are simply doing that comparison. The bank statement tells me that I have 10,000 Rand in my bank account according to their statement, according to their records, which we often refer to as an external record, because remember, the bank prepares the bank statement, whereas my records, my general ledger bank account tells me I've got 12,000 Rand in my bank account according to my internal records, according to the records that I've prepared or my bookkeeper has prepared. So I now need to reconcile, okay? Reconcile, compare the bank statement to my books, my bank account. Now remember, why would these amounts be different? Something that you did in grade 11. It could be due to errors. So remember, sometimes we could have made certain errors in our CRJ or our CPJ, and remember, the bank also could make certain errors. So by mistake, they debited your account twice for a debit order, or they paid out the incorrect check, or some kind of error was made by the bank. So there could be errors. Then there could be additional entries, right? Additional entries that we have not recorded or the bank has not acknowledged on the bank statement, right? There could be omissions. So remember, omissions, the bank could have left out certain items, we could have left out certain items. So we basically do this reconciliation as an internal control over cash. Okay, right, so now that that's out of the way, let's go back to RCB traders and let's begin with this bank reconciliation. Okay, so we're going to look at the information given, and remember, we are either entering this information in our bank general ledger or we are making a note in our bank reconciliation statement. Right, so the first bit of information, on the 30th of June 2009, which is obviously the end of the month, the bank account in the general ledger showed a favorable balance of 3,996. So immediately, this is obviously in our records. So let's start by bringing down this balance. Remember what I said earlier on, I am going to do a ledger account. So obviously on the debit side, I am bringing down a balance of 3,996. Now remember, if you chose to do a sum, you would start off with a positive 3,996, a favorable balance in our general ledger. Right, information 1 taken into account. Let's now move on to information 2. On the 30th of June 2009, the bank statement from Rand Bank showed a credit balance of 1,020. So in other words, according to the bank statement, according to the external record that we receive from, in this case, Rand Bank, we have a favorable balance. Remember, credit means favorable in the bank statement of 1,020. So remember, that bit of information will now go in your bank reconciliation statement. So balance as per bank statement, you can fill in credit balance as per bank statement. On the credit side, that amount of 1,020. Okay, right, let's now begin with our reconciliation. So let's go now to the next bit of information. A comparison of the bank statement for June 2009 with the cash journals for the same period revealed the following differences. Okay, so after doing a comparison between our records and the bank statement, these are the differences we've noticed. Now the question is, where do you put these differences? Remember, if you made a mistake or you left something out from your records, you're going to obviously enter this in your general ledger, your bank account. However, if the bank omitted something, in other words, it's already in your records, but not in the bank statement, you will then make a note of this in the bank reconciliation statement. Okay, so we're going to do exactly that. So let's look at the very first difference. A check received from a debtor, B. Berger, for 300 Rand in settlement of a debt of 325 Rand was dishonored due to insufficient funds. Okay, so immediately we've got obviously a check that we deposited into our bank account, but now the bank statement is telling us, sorry, B. Berger didn't have money in his account, therefore we are going to dishonor this payment. We are not going to pay out the 300 Rand because the guy doesn't have money in his account. Right, so how are we going to deal with this? Now the first question, we've got 300 Rand, we've got 325 Rand. Which figure do we use? So remember guys, 325 Rand is obviously the amount that Mr. Berger was owing the business. He probably came to our shop and we told him, pay us only 300 Rand, because remember the check was for 300 Rand, which means we gave him a discount of 25 Rand. Now, when you are completing a bank recon, you are only interested in the check amount, not in the amount owing. Because remember, the dishonored check is what you now need to cancel in your CPJ. only the check, not the amount owing, not the discount that is given. The discount will obviously be cancelled in the general journal, but we are not interested in the general journal in this particular case. So that 300 Rand is going to now affect our cash payments journal. Remember, we thought we received 300 Rand. We entered this in our CRJ, but because the check is dishonored, we've got to now cancel this in our CPJ. So since we're not doing journals, how is this going to affect? So obviously bank is an asset. It has a favorable balance. So if there are any additional receipts, right, CRJ is going to increase our bank balance, whereas CPJ, any additional payments, is going to decrease our balance. So remember, we are now cancelling the 300 Rand. So immediately, we are now going to decrease our bank account by 300. So I'm doing a T account, so obviously I'm crediting bank, but you could always minus 300 if you prefer to do a sum. Okay, right, first error sorted. Let's now move on to the second error. So we're looking at error B, or difference B, not necessarily an error. A deposit of 2,420 Rand on the 30th of June 2009 in the cash receipts journal did not appear in the bank statement. Okay, so we've got a deposit for 2,420 Rand. It's appearing in the CRJ in our records, but it's not appearing in the bank statement. Okay, so for some reason, the bank is not acknowledging on the bank statement that we deposited 2,420 Rand. Now, the reason for that could be that this was deposited on the last day of the month. And remember, the banks often close their books a few days early because they've got to prepare the bank statement. So they might close off their books by the 27th, 28th of June. So naturally, if you deposit money on the 30th of June, it's not going to appear in your bank statement. So where are we going to record this? We're going to go to our bank reconciliation statement, and we're now going to make a note of this. Let me just quickly scroll down. So remember, bank reconciliation statement, here you're going to record items that the bank has not taken into account, has not recorded or taken into account. Okay, so remember, a deposit will appear on the credit side of the bank statement. So credit, outstanding deposit, credit, outstanding deposit. And on the credit side, we will show that amount of 2,420. Remember, we're not recording it in our records because it's already in our records. Okay, right, let's move on now to difference number C. The following stop orders appeared on the bank statement, so it's in the external records, but not in the relevant cash journal. So remember guys, stop orders, very similar to a debit order. Money is being withdrawn from your bank account. It could be to pay for insurance, it could be to pay for a vehicle installment or whatever the case may be. So remember, the bank statement becomes a source document for the accountant in terms of recording this information in your cash journals. So the very first payment, 975 Rand for the annual fire insurance premium in favor of Kohli insurers, right? So immediately let's record that in our bank account. So remember, it's a payment. Our bank balance is going to decrease 975, or you can simply say minus 975. Right, the next stop order, 890 Rand in payment of a monthly installment on the private motor vehicle of the owner, Vimalia, in favor of Toyota. So the second another payment of 890. Remember again, it's in the bank statement, but it's not in our records. So our bank balance is going to now decrease by 890. Right, as you can see, guys, I'm obviously not putting contra accounts because they're not asking you to prepare a proper bank account. So my general ledger is simply a calculation. That is why I'm not filling in any details. Okay, so remember, instead of crediting 890, you could have obviously minused 890. Okay, so far we're doing good. Hopefully we are. Let's carry on. We will take a break very soon, but let's just move on to the next difference. Okay, so we sorted out the stop orders. So this is sorted. Let's now look at D. The following checks issued during June have not yet been presented to the bank for payments. Okay, so immediately, guys, the following checks, remember, I know we don't really issue checks in today's day. We obviously deal more with EFTs, but remember, your syllabus still talks about checks. So checks were issued, but not presented for payment. So remember, I could give you a check. You've got 6 months to go to the bank and cash that check. So the checks were issued already in our records, but not presented to the bank. How do we know it was not presented to the bank? Because if it was, it would appear in the bank statement, and that's not happening. Okay, it hasn't been presented to the bank for payment. So immediately we are now going to record these outstanding checks in our bank reconciliation statement. It'll appear as outstanding checks until the checks have been cashed. So we've got check number 72 for 90 Rand, check number 75 for 510 Rand, check number 76 for 120 Rand. Now, please do not enter this in your CPJ. It's already in your CPJ. You've got to now show it as outstanding checks in your bank reconciliation statement. So let's start with check number 72 first. Okay, let's enter this, and then I promise we're going to take a quick break. So debit, outstanding checks. Okay, remember, always fill in the check number. So we've got check number 72 for an amount of 90 Rand. The next check was check number 75. Okay, and that was for 510 Rand. Let's just quickly double check that it was for 510 Rand. I just want to go back. Okay, so it was 90 Rand, 510 Rand, and then check number 76 for 120 Rand. So let's fill that in. Check number 76. So check number 76 for 120 Rand. So let's look at information E. A tenant in Kempt deposited the rent for June, 880 Rand, directly into the current bank account of the business. So you've got your tenant, he pays you 880 Rand. Instead of coming to your shop and giving you the money, he probably did an EFT. He deposited the money directly into your bank account. So remember, anything deposited directly into your bank account will appear in your bank statement, and you now need to record this in your records. So 880 Rand in our bank account. Let's just go to our answer sheet. So remember, our bank balance is now going to increase by 880 because we are receiving money. It will not go in the bank reconciliation statement because it's already appearing in the bank statement. Okay, right, let's now look at the final difference. Okay, so the very last difference. Check number 74 was issued to Printright for stationery 267 Rand that was purchased. This transaction was incorrectly entered in the CPJ as 276. The correct amount appears in the bank statement. Okay, so immediately, guys, there is an error. Someone made an error. So from the information given, an amount, okay, the correct amount, 267 Rand, was for stationery that was purchased. So that amount is correct. The transaction was incorrectly entered in the CPJ. So in other words, we made an error. Okay, so it's like a kind of a smiley face there. No, it doesn't really look like a smiley face. Let's fix that. Or not a smiley face, a sad face, because we made an error in our CPJ and we entered the amount as 276 Rand, which is obviously an error. It's incorrect. Right, so immediately, as you can see, in our CPJ, we wrote too much. We overstated our CPJ by, so if we take 276 minus 267, we obviously swapped the 7 and the 6 around, so we overstated our CPJ by, it should be 9 Rand. So remember, we overstated. Overstated means we wrote too much in the CPJ. So how does that affect our bank account? Very, very simple. So remember, we overstated, we subtracted 9 Rand too much. How are you going to fix that? You are now going to add. You will make an entry in the CRJ where you will now add the 9 Rand, the error that you made. Why are we correcting our records? Because we made the error. Remember, if the bank made an error, we would phone the bank, we would inform them that they made an error, and then we would note it in the bank reconciliation statement. Okay, but because we made the error, we've got to now enter the 9 Rand in our records. Okay, right, and that should be it as far as the information is concerned. I just want to quickly double check that I'm not leaving out any. Okay, so that's it. So now comes the point where we've got to see whether or not this is going to reconcile. So remember, guys, we're going to have to now balance this account. So let me just quickly say plus 9 here. So you can balance the account, or you can just look at the sum that we've done. Doesn't really matter. So let's just clear that. Okay, so on the debit side, 3996 plus the 880 plus the 9 Rand. And then we're going to have to minus, let's just move this. Okay, so we're going to have to minus the 300, right? Then we're going to have to minus the 975, and then minus the 890, and our bank balance after all the additional adjustments, 2,720, and as you can see, it's a favorable balance. So the balance that you are ending up with, okay, 2,720, or you could just write down 2,720 as a sum. Remember, it doesn't really matter because they're telling you to calculate the bank balance. So you can choose whichever method you prefer. Right, once I've calculated my bank balance, remember the bank reconciliation statement should give me the same balance if I'm using a 1-column bank reconciliation statement, but because I'm using a 2-column, so at the bottom, okay, I've got a debit balance as per bank, and in brackets, general ledger. So according to my records, I've got 2,720, 2,720, and if I've now reconciled all the items, the debit side should balance to the credit side. And often it's around this time where you get slightly nervous, is it going to balance? So let's now check whether or not it balances or whether I made an error. So I'm going to add up the debit side, 2,720 plus 120 plus 510 and then plus 90. So on the debit side, I'm getting a total of 3,440. And then if I add up the credit side, I should get the same total. Okay, fingers crossed. Let's clear that. So if we add 1,020 plus 2,420, and that's giving me a total of 3,440. Okay, and that's when you can breathe a sigh of relief because it has balanced. Okay, now remember guys, if you are doing a one-column bank recon, you should end up with 2,720 as your final amount, where obviously you're not showing totals on either side. But as you can see, we've correctly reconciled our records with the bank's records. Okay, so hopefully that assisted you in terms of bank recon. There's a few theory questions, but most of this we've discussed already. So let's go through them. It shouldn't take too long. And let's hope there's time to do a debtors recon. Right, so the first question, refer to information 3F. So that's the last information we tackled for the next 3 questions. In which journal will the correction be recorded? So obviously we've got to go back to information 3F because I've forgotten, right? So 3F, check number 74 was issued to print write for stationery. The transaction was incorrectly entered in the CPJ. The correct amount appears in the bank statement. So obviously we discussed this already. So remember, we overstated our CPJ by 9 Rand. So in which journal, if you are completing journals, if you are writing too much in the CPJ or you overstated the CPJ, that makes more sense. Remember, you will make the correction in the opposite journal, which is the CRJ. Okay, so let's enter that as our answer. We will enter this in the CRJ. I think that was just for 1 mark. Right, then the next question, state the double entry which account is debited and credited to record the correction. Now remember, obviously bank gets affected and we purchased stationery. Okay, so if bank, remember we obviously overstated the CPJ with 9 Rand. So we now need to debit our bank account with the 9 Rand, which means stationery must be credited with the 9 Rand. Because remember, you would have also overstated stationery. Whatever that amount was, I think it was 276. Okay, so it was 276. So you've got to now credit, you've got to remove 9 Rand from stationery. So debit bank, okay, and you are crediting stationery. That's what you purchased. Okay, and this was for 2 marks. Right, so far not difficult, quite straightforward. Right, then the next question, just go back. Okay, the next question, suggest 2 ways whereby this type of error can be avoided in the future. So you guys are probably thinking, but hang on, 9 Rand, not that hectic. I mean, surely the accountant can be forgiven. Yes, but remember guys, if that 9 Rand becomes 9,000 or 90,000 or 9 million, it could be serious problems for the business itself in terms of controlling their cash. So suggest 2 ways in which these type of errors could be corrected. You could suggest that a senior bookkeeper, okay, a senior bookkeeper checks the journals, okay, checks the journals regularly or once a week, for example, right? You could talk about comparing, okay, source documents. So compare the source document. It could be an invoice that was received, right, to the check counterfoil, and then obviously compare this also to the entry in the CPJ. And then you can obviously easily identify these errors. So I've suggested 2 ways. You could think of other internal controls. Remember, think about the internal control before you write this down. Okay, right, I think it's a final question. Okay, let's just quickly look. The final question, and then we can move on to a debtor's recon. State the double entry to cancel a dishonored check received from a debtor. So remember, guys, when you receive a dishonored check, obviously the two accounts affected, debtor's control is one account, and the other account affected has to be your bank account. So debtor's control, remember the debtor needs to owe you that money again because he didn't really pay you the 300 Rand in our case. So obviously debtor's control must be debited because by debiting debtor's control, he now owes you the 300 Rand. So you're going to debit debtor's control, and your bank account will be credited because remember, you didn't receive that money, and obviously you've got to cancel the entry that you made when you received the check from the debtor. So you would credit your bank account. Okay, right.